There are several ways to go into the Access program. Sometimes we have an icon on our desktop. Sometimes there's an icon down here on the taskbar, like I have it over here. Or sometimes you will go to the Start menu and search for Access there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the icon on my taskbar. Now, when we see this first screen, we can open up an existing database. We can make a blank database, or there's some templates that you can use as well. So the Access file is called a database, and a database contains all the different objects for that database. So in Access, everything is contained in one big file that's called a database. So let's go ahead and go into an existing database, and then pretty soon we'll make a blank database. So let's take a tour of the screen. So like the other Microsoft programs, we have the menus, or now they're called tabs. So of course, if I pick on the File menu, then you have all the commands that would be under File: New, Open, Save As, Print, Options. I'm going to close that with the arrow. Now, if we pick on the Home menu, then we have cut and paste and copy and paste. Right there we can do our filters and our sorts. Then over here we can add a record or delete a record. Here we can do a find, and then you have your formatting. So the Home menu has a lot of very popular choices. Let's pick on the Create menu. And the Create menu is where we make every part of our Access database. So we have tables, queries, forms, reports, macros, and modules. So let's describe each one of those. The table is where we store our data in the Access database. So you're going to have a different table for each different list of information. If you have a customers list, you'll have a customers table. If you have a list of employees, you'll have a separate table for employees. So the table is where we store all of our data in the Access database. You really can't do anything else in Access before you have some tables. So we're going to spend this session showing you how to make your tables. A query is similar to a filter in Microsoft Excel. It's where we can sort and filter the data. And then we can do a lot more with the queries than we can in Excel. And a query can become a permanent part of the database. So in the next course, we'll talk all about building the queries. A form is a data entry screen. So in Access, we can make user-friendly, nice-looking, easy-to-navigate data entry screens, and they're called forms. And we have a whole other course on the forms. Then a report is a nicely printed version of the data. So we can format the report to look very nice. The report can have custom fields, and it can have subtotals and grand totals. So the report is kind of the finished product of your database, and we'll have a whole other course on building the reports. Then a macro is similar to a macro in Excel, where it's going to be a list of actions, and when you run the macro, all the actions will run. So it's a way to automate your database. Now with the macros, you don't have to be a programmer. To build a macro, it's a menu-driven system, and you don't have to have programming experience to make a macro, but it's a way to automate your database. Modules, on the other hand, use the Visual Basic Code, or the VBA. So with modules, you do have to know something about programming. So we'll have a whole other course on building the macros and the modules. So everything in the Access database gets made through the Create menu. And we'll see lots of examples of that. Now, external data means we can import or export data from other sources. So if I pick on external data and then pick on new source, then you're going to see we can import from many different file types into Access. I'm going to show you how to do that during this course. Now, we can also export from Access into other data types, and we can talk about that during this course as well. If we pick on Database Tools, then there's certain utilities that'll be in there. Every week you might want to compact and repair your database. Here is where we can manage the relationships. I'm going to cover that during this course. Then we have different ways to make the database perform better. There's actually a way to document the database. Okay. Now these two over here can link this database to external databases. So we can talk about that maybe in a different course. But the database tools are different utilities that we run with the database. Of course, we have our help menu. And there's lots of help available for Access. It's very widely supported. And hopefully the courses that I am making for you will help you with Access as well. But there's lots of other help available, of course. All right. So we have our menus. Of course, the new word for the menus is the tabs. And notice when I pick on each different menu or each different tab, the whole toolbar changes. And now the toolbar is called the ribbon. So those are pretty similar concepts to the other Microsoft programs. Now, at the very top, we have our quick access toolbar. So that stays up there all the time, so you can have your favorite icons always available. Let me show you two quick ways to add things to the quick access toolbar. So if I click on this arrow to the right of the quick access toolbar, you can pick on any one of those. So I'll pick on print preview, and now the print icon is on the quick access toolbar, so it's really that quick and easy. If I click on that arrow, then you pick any one of those. In this case, I'll pick on spelling, and now the spell checker is on the quick access toolbar. Now, another way to add things to the quick access toolbar is to right click on any of your icons. So if I right click on copy, then I'll say add the quick access toolbar, and now that one is up there as well. So I just showed you two ways to add things to the quick access toolbar. I do use that a lot. This way your favorite icons are always available at the top, and that would work the same way in Word and PowerPoint and Excel. Now, if you look over here on the left, this window is called the navigation pane. And the navigation pane is where we'll find all of the objects for our database. Now, this database just has tables, okay? But usually you would see tables, queries, forms, reports, macros, and modules. So this is called the navigation pane. Now, watch my mouse. If I click on this arrow right here, then you can change the way the navigation pane appears. Now, I like to, I've been using Access for so long that I like to have it by object type, and I like to show all Access objects. And that way, then the tables will be first, and then queries and forms and reports, and then macros and modules. So when we say object type, then it'll show in that order, and then I like to see all Access objects. But notice how you can click on that arrow on the navigation pane, and you can decide how you want to see that. So I like it by object type, and I like to see all Access objects, but you could change it in different ways over here. Now also, you can hide the navigation pane. So if I click on this arrow, then it hides that. Gives them more screen space, basically. And then if I pick on that arrow, we can bring that back again. Good. If I click on this arrow, it'll hide the tables, and then I can click on that arrow to bring it back again. And then, of course, we can search the objects over here as well. Sometimes the database might have a lot of objects. Now, this window in here is where we would actually see the actual object. So, for example, if I double-click on the categories table, I'm going to double-click there. Then it'll display that table in this window. So this is the window where most of the work is going to happen. Here, it just displayed that table. So I just double-clicked on that table, and we can see the contents of that table. This is called Datasheet View. Now, throughout this video, throughout this course and all the other courses, let me show you ways to go back and forth among your views. So I can right-click on this tab, and then I can pick on Design View. And Design View is actually where we construct the table. We can add fields or change fields. So you can just right-click on that tab, and then I can see Datasheet View, and that brings us back to the data, for example. Now, if you had more than one window open, then there would be different tabs across here. So in Excel, maybe the tabs will be at the bottom, but here the tabs are going to be across, and that would be the different windows of Access. So I can close that window, of course, with the X. Now, another way to go back and forth with your views is on the Home menu. So if I click on Home, then I can click on the pull down where it says View, and then we can change our views that way. So there's Design View again, and then we can see how in Design View we can add or change our fields. So this window in the middle is really where you can manage all of your objects, and that's where the actual work would happen. So this window is called the navigation pane. And then this window is where actually you do all your procedures within Access. So I'm going to close that window. I just double clicked on that table to display the table's contents, and then I can right click on that tab to go, I can save it, close all of the windows, or I can go into Design View. And then you can also change your views by clicking on the view over here. And then of course we can close that window. So we're just taking a tour of the screen. So if we look down here where it says ready, we have the status bar. So there's different things that will show up on the status bar as we go through the entire course. So I'll try to show you when that's going to be important to pay attention to the status bar. So now you have an idea of the screen. So now this database already has some tables on there. So we're actually going to make a blank database from scratch. So I'm going to close this particular database. I'm going to click on File and then Close. And now we're in the Access program, but there's no database actually made at this time. So we're going to go ahead and make a new database. So I'll pick on File and I'll pick on New. Now there are some templates that you might want to try. If some of those meet your needs, maybe you can try some of those templates, and it gives you a tremendous head start. Or you can search for other templates online. And there's actually a lot of templates that you might be able to use to give yourself a great head start. But I think it's also important to know how to make the database from scratch as well. So let's click on Blank Database. Now, you want to give your database a name. Usually it's going to put it into the Documents folder. Of course, you can pick a different folder if you wanted to, but the default folder for Access is the Documents folder. So I'm going to go ahead and call this Class 1. And then I'll pick on the word Create. Now, when it first makes the database, it puts you right into a table. Well, I'm not ready for that yet, so I'm going to close that window. And now we're in the blank database. Notice how it doesn't have any objects yet. So we're going to make tables in several ways during this course. First, I want to show you how to make a table from scratch. So what I recommend is that you would write down the list of your fields before you make your table. Or you can always add or change fields later on. But I would recommend that you have a list of your fields first. So let's come up here and let's pick on the word Create. So in this case, I'm going to pick on Table Design. So this is the way I learned how to make a table a long time ago. So we'll pick on Table Design, and we're really making the table from scratch at this time. So notice how we're in Design View. So this is where you put your field names, and then we have many data types that I'll talk about, and then you can put a description in that field as well. So our first table is going to be a list of clients. So let's say with the clients, I want to have a company name. Now let me give you a naming standard for the fields. You don't have to use this naming standard, but many people do. So notice how each word is capitalized, and I didn't put any spaces there. Access is actually okay with spaces in the field names, but other databases are not good with spaces. So just to make things consistent with other databases, I don't use spaces in my field names, although each word is capitalized, as you can see. So now I'm just going to tab over to the data type column, and I'm going to click on this pull down for the data type. So let's talk about some of the different data types here in Access. So a short text field is going to be alphanumeric. That means it could be numbers or letters and some special characters. And it can be up to 255 characters long. So anything like a name or an address or a city or a state or anything like that will be a short text field. And that is one that you use quite a bit. Now, this used to be called a text field in the older versions of Access. Now it's called short text. Now, a long text field, it used to be called a memo, and that could be an alphanumeric field. That one can be up to 65,000 characters long. So maybe that's good for a description or a notes field or something like that. This used to be called a memo, now it's called a long text. Then we have a number field, and this is going to be any kind of number. So it could be a positive or a negative number. It could be a whole or a decimal number. Any kind of number that you would use in a mathematical statement would be a number field. So maybe a tax rate. A tax rate would be a number because I have to do math with that. Now, when I started with Access a long time ago, they didn't have this large number data type. So that would be for your larger numbers, maybe for like, scientific purposes or, literally astronomical number, right? So I haven't had a purpose to use the large number fields, but if maybe like for scientific purposes or, if you're talking about astronomy, then we have really large numbers like that. That would just be one example. But usually the numbers are adequate for that. Now, let's pick a date and time. So that would be where you have a date or a time, or the date and time field could be both the date and the time. So maybe a start date, an end date, a start time, an end time, a birth date. Those will all be examples of a date and time field. A currency data type is like a number field. So it can be used in mathematical statements, but a currency field is going to give us a dollar sign and decimal places. So you would use that for money, like a salary or a unit price. I would make into a currency field. So it'll have the dollar sign and the decimal places automatically built right in, but I can use it in mathematical statements just like a number field. An auto number field will give each record a different sequential number. So the first record will have 1, and then 2, and then 3, and so on. So it's actually a way to give the record a unique identifier if it doesn't have it already. So we'll talk about the auto number during this session, of course. We're going to talk about all of these. The YesNo field comes up a lot. So let's say you want to say, is this product seasonal? Yes or no. Or is the employee seasonal? Yes or no. So those come up a lot. Now this one is for legacy databases. I really wouldn't use it anymore because there's better ways to do that. This used to be a way we would capture maybe a picture or a JPEG into our file. But the problem with it is when we use the OLE object, it imports that entire picture into the Access database, and it makes the database much bigger in size. So I would really avoid that one unless you see it in legacy databases. The newer ways to do it are the next two. So a hyperlink can be a website name or an email address or a file name. So this one would actually capture the entire file into the Access database and make the database much bigger. This one would just be the file name. And then when we click on that file name, it would open up that file in the other program. So this is a much more efficient way to maybe point to a file or a picture of another data type. Now, the attachment, the hyperlink can have one file per field. So what if we had 5 pictures that were associated with that record? I would need 5 hyperlink fields. On the other hand, if you make an attachment, you can have one field with multiple files. So if you think you have multiple files associated with that, then you might want to use an attachment instead of a hyperlink. It's just maybe a little bit more efficient. Now we can have calculated fields in our table. For a long time, the calculated fields were only available in queries and forms and reports. But now we can do a calculated field in a table. And then a lookup wizard can make a pull down out of any field. So I'm going to show you examples of most of these during today's course. So the company name is just going to be short text. Obviously, that's not going to be bigger than 255 characters, right? Now, let's come down here, and then we have our field size. So each field is going to have its own properties. We're going to talk more about the properties pretty soon. But one I would probably adjust would be the field size. Obviously, the company name doesn't have to be 255 characters long. Maybe I'll make that one 40. How about 50? Now, you can always change that later on by going back into Design View. But I would start with that field so it's not so big, because what can happen is if you have a lot of records in this table, then every single record is going to allocate that much space for that field, whether it uses it or not. So if you make that field too big, then it's going to waste a lot of space. So just take a good guess And you can always change that size later on. But I'll say 50 will be a good size for the company name. We'll talk about some of the other properties later on. In fact, let's say they have to type in a company name. So I'm going to make that field required as well. So see down here, I'm going to change that no to the yes. I just double click there, or I can use the pull down, of course. So when it's required, that means Access is not going to allow you to leave that field blank. So sometimes you want to make your fields required. Now let's also have maybe the contact name, the first name. So I'll type in first name. You can see the naming standard that I use, and many people use that naming standard in Access where they didn't put any spaces. They just capitalize each word. Now, if your company has naming standards for these fields, by all means use that as well. But this is kind of one that people use in Access quite a bit. Now, this one is going to be a short text field. Now, first name obviously doesn't have to be 255. Maybe that'll be 30. Good. And then we'll have a last name. This is why I said you should make a list of your fields before you come into this screen. It'll just make sure you don't miss anything. It'll give you some good documentation. It's really what I recommend. Have a list of your fields before you go into this screen. Although you can always add or change fields later on. The last name is going to be a short text field, and maybe that one's going to be 40. So you take a good guess, and then we can always change it later on if we have to. But I wouldn't leave it at 255, because then you're probably going to waste a lot of space. Every single record would allocate that much space for those fields, even if it doesn't use it. So then let's say we have address 1. Address 1 is going to be a short text field, and maybe that'll be like 80. So that'll be like, 123 Main Street will be in the address 1 field. And then address 2, maybe that's where we'll have like suite 55 or apartment 12 or something like that. So I'll have address 2, and that'll be a short text, and that'll be 80. We're going to use different data types pretty soon, but the text is one that we use quite a bit. So we'll have a city field. So I like nice common sense field names, but if your company has naming standards, by all means use those. So city, let's say the city is going to be 40. Now for the state, in that case, I want to give it a specific field size. So let's say we go with the 2-character state. So I'll type in 2 for the field size. So that'll actually limit them to 2 characters. They won't be able to type in more than 2 characters because of that field size. So there is a specific purpose for that. Now also, we'll do something else with the state a little bit later on. So let's have a zip code. Now, even though the zip code is all numbers, at least here in the United States, there's never a reason to do math with that. And another reason I would make the zip code a short text field is because I live in a state where the zip codes start with 0. So if you made that a number field, it would actually truncate that leaving 0. So we'll just leave the zip code as a short text field. So in this case, let's say it used to be 5 here in the United States. So I'll put it as 5 right now. And then later on, I'll show you how we can change that. Now it's 9. So let's say we'll start it off as 5, and we'll change it later on. So then let's say we have a phone number. Phone number, same kind of thing. There's no reason to make that a number field. I never have to add up a phone number. But there is reasons to make it a text field, because maybe the phone number will have parentheses or the dashes. So if the field is going to have any non-numeric characters, then you have to make it a text field. A number field can only contain numbers. Let's make the phone number maybe like 20, and then we'll do something else with the phone number later on. So then let's start to use some other data types. So let's say we wanted to capture the email address. Now the email address could be a short text, but I want that to be a clickable field. So then for that reason, we'll make it a hyperlink, all right? So that means we'll be able to type it in like a text field, but it'll automatically be a clickable field. It'll automatically be a link. So maybe for these customers, I want to have a credit limit. So we're going to call the field credit limit. Now, that's going to be a number. In fact, it's going to be a currency field. A currency field is a number field, except it's already formatted with the $sign and some decimal places. So we'll make that a currency field. Now, here's another one of those properties down below. We have something that's called the validation rule and the validation text. So let's make sure, we're going to make sure that the credit limit is going to be, it has to be less than or equal to 10,000. So watch. For the validation rule, for the credit limit, I'm going to say less than or equal to 10,000. Now, there's all kinds of different criteria we can use for that. Anything that can be used in a query can be used for this validation rule. All right, so that was just an example. It could be all kinds of different validation rules there. But that means if they type in a number that's bigger than 10,000, it's not going to accept it, it'll reject it. So you can do field by field validation here. Now the validation text is going to be a message that they get if they typed in something over $10,000. So I'll say the credit limit must be $10,000 or less. Please try again. So the validation rule is going to be field by field validation. And then if they typed in something different, then the validation text will display. So we'll see how that one works. All right, so they have a credit limit. Let's say we have a field that's called start date. When did they start being a customer? Now, if the field name itself has the word date or time, then it probably gives you a clue as to what data type to use. So we'll use date and time. So there's a lot of things we can do with the date and time fields that you can't do with a text field. It'll make sure that it is a valid date when they type those in. And then also, it'll make sure that there's a lot of things we can do with the date and time fields as we go through these courses in Access. I'll show you a lot about that. So that's good. We have a start date. Now, let's say, are they, you know how a lot of, let's say we have preferred customers. Are they a preferred customer? So in this case, we'll make it a yes/no field. So we'll see what a yes/no field looks like as well. So I want to have notes about that customer. Now the notes, that might get really, really long. So I'm not going to make that a short text. I'm going to make it a long text. We don't know how long that one's going to get. So I'll make that a long text field. So your table can have as many fields. Actually, one table can have up to 255 fields per table. And we can always add more after that. So I'm just trying to show you how we get our table started here in Design View. So we'll add or change more fields as we go forward. So actually, let's have another field. So what if we say discount amount. Now that's going to be a number field. All right, so maybe we want to apply a discount to them and so on. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close that window with the X. Now, of course, we want to save that table. So I'm going to say yes to save the table. Now you want to give each table in each object in your database a name. So I'm going to call this table clients. Now in some Access databases, they'll have a naming standard for the object names as well. Sometimes the tables will have a prefix of TBL. The queries could have a prefix of QRY. The forms can have a prefix of FRM. And the reports can have a prefix of RPT. So it might be called TBL clients. So sometimes you might see that. If your company does that, please do that as well. So you don't have to do it. Many people do it in the Access community. Maybe they have a prefix for the tables of TBL. Queries might be QRY. Forms will be FRM. And reports will be RPT as the prefix. I'm not going to use that here, but it certainly is out there. So I'm going to call this table clients. Now I'm going to click on OK. Now it's asking if we want a primary key. So a primary key is going to be a unique identifier for each record. So think about the social security number. So everybody has a different social security number so that they can use that number to look up one person's information. So it's asking if we want this table to have a primary key. It says, although a primary key isn't required, it's highly recommended. So it says, do you want to create a primary key? In this case, I am going to do that. So we'll pick on yes. And then we'll see what that means very soon. So that's how we would create a table using Design View. Now let's go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and double click on this table. You see the clients table in the navigation pane. I'm going to double click on the clients table. When you double click on a table, it puts you into data entry view or Datasheet view. So this kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet if you think about it. We have the column headings up top, and then each row will be a different record. Now, we just asked it to add a primary key. So what it did is it added this new field that's called ID. So notice how it says the word new there. When a field says the word new, it's going to be an auto number field. So if I try to type in something there, it doesn't let me. So it'll fill that in for you automatically. So just tab through. I'm going to hit the tab key. So let's say we have company ABC, ABC products. Now notice how I'll put a number 1 in the ID field, and the next one will be 2 and 3. So those are all their numbers. Now you're just going to tab through, or you can hit the enter key to go to the next field. So let's say for the first name, I'll put in Kelly Robinson. Now we didn't really, the only field that we made required was the company name field. All these other fields are not required. So let's say the address is 123 Main Street. These are just text fields, right? No big deal. Address 2 is not required, so I can skip that. Let's say the city is Philadelphia. Now for the state, wouldn't it be nice if we have a pull down for the state? We'll get to that in a little while. That's going to be called the Lookup Wizard. So I'm going to type in PA there. Now for the zip code, remember how we made it a text field, and we made it 5 digits long, 5 characters long. So it won't let me type in more than 5 characters there. I'm trying to, but because we made that field size 5, it won't let me type in any more than 5 characters there. Now the phone number, wouldn't it be nice if the parentheses and the dashes came up from the phone number? But right now we're going to type those in. Pretty soon we'll make that come up automatically. So I'll type in 555-1212. Now because we made that a text field, it would accept the parentheses and the dashes. If we made that a number field, it would not. Now remember with the email address, we made that a hyperlink. So let's say we type in ABC products. You can see how it looks a little bit different than the other fields because it's actually a live link now. And we'll say abcproducts@gmail.com. And you can see just right away that if I move my mouse there, then it's a link. And that didn't happen with any of the other fields. So that's a hyperlink field. Now, remember how we made the credit limit a currency field? And that's why it's coming up with the $signs and the decimal places. But remember how we added in that the validation rule. So I'll type in 25,000 there. And look what it says. The credit limit must be 10,000 or less. Please try again. So the validation rule kicked in, and then this is the validation text. So it really worked. It's not going to accept anything that's more than $10,000. So let's change that maybe to 9,000. Now for the start date, we made that a date and time field. So there's a couple special qualities that the date and time field has. First of all, it has the calendar. So we can use the calendar to pick a date. Well, I can pick on today's date right there. Good. Now, a date and time field will only accept a date or a time. Now, another way to put today's date into that field is control semicolon. Control semicolon. That also works in Excel. If you want the current date in a cell, you could do control semicolon. Or if you do shift control semicolon, it actually gives you the current time. So if you're in a date and time field, if you do control semicolon, it gives you the current date. And if you do shift control semicolon, it'll give you the current time. All right, so those are built-in keyboard shortcuts. Now, watch out, I'm going to try to type in a date that's not valid. So let's say I'll type in 6/31/2020. When I try to leave that field, it says it's not a valid date, okay? So all of that happened because it was a date and time field. If that was a text field, it would have accepted anything there. But now it's only going to accept a date and time value. So that all kicked in. So anyway, I'll go back to the calendar and pick on today's date. Good. Now we made the preferred customer field a yes/no field. So it comes up as a checkbox. If you click that box, when the check mark is there, that means it's yes. If we click it again, that means it's no. So that's a yes/no field. You can also use that with your space bar. If I type in my space bar, that'll turn that on or off as well. Now, the notes field is going to be one of those long text fields. I can type there up to 65,000 characters, right? So that would be for longer fields. And then we have the discount amount. Remember how we made that a number field? So it would only accept numbers there. In fact, if I try to type in something that's not a number, it doesn't like that. So, you know, the data types will be important as far as what kind of data that you can type in there. So I'll do enter new value, and I'll just leave that as a 0 for right now. Good. Now I'm going to go to the next record. Now I can't type in a field that says new. That'll be one of those auto number fields. So I'm just going to tab over to the company name, and I'll type in XYZ company. Notice how that auto number became number 2. So that's how the auto numbers work. They're going to give you the next sequential number for each record. Now, we didn't make any of those other fields mandatory or required, so I can actually skip a lot of those fields. In fact, you see this little pencil over here on the left. When we see that pencil, that means that record hasn't saved yet. So I can actually hit the escape key right now. It will go back. So when you see the pencil, you have a chance to escape out. Once you leave that record, or if you close that window, then it'll save that record automatically. So if I go to the next record, it does save that. Now, remember how we made the company field so it was required? So let's say I have the first name. I'll use my own name here. Let's say I try to leave that record without putting in a company name. I'm just going to click on this new record, and look what it says. You must enter in a company name. That's because we made it required. So you can start to see how those different properties kick in. We can see how the different data types work. I'm going to click on OK. So the window that we're in right now, let's call that one ZZZ company. If I type that in, then it'll let me go through that record. So this record is called Data View or Datasheet View. And then to change your views, I can right click on that tab and we can go back to Design View. Now, if I try to go back to Design View right now, it is going to ask me if I want to save. Okay, so it saved that record, and now we're back in Design View again. So now let's talk about how we can add fields or change fields in Design View. Of course, we made the table in Design View, but you can always go back to a table and go back to Design View to add or change fields. So let's do some examples here. Now, remember when we made this table and we saved it, it said, do you want to create a primary key? So look what it did. It made this field that's called ID. It made it an auto number field, and we saw how that works. And if you look really closely over there, that little key is there. So that makes it into a primary key. Now, the primary key is kind of a special field. Notice down here, the property says index. It says, yes, it's indexed, and no duplicates are allowed. So it'll actually enforce that. It'll make sure there's no duplicates allowed. But also because it's an auto number, it'll give you the next sequential number anyway. So it made that field when we said, yes, we wanted a primary key. I like to give that field a different name. So I wouldn't just call it ID. I would call it maybe company ID. So you want to give your primary key a better name, and there's reasons for that. Now, notice how that field has that little key right there that makes it into a primary key. Here's how you can make up your own field as a primary key. I can right-click. Let's say we'll use the company name as an example. I'm going to right-click on company name and then pick on primary key. It'll let you make a field a primary key as long as every field is already unique, as long as every record is unique. So I'll pick on primary key, and then that field is the primary key. But let's go back to the customer ID. I'm going to right-click on there, and I'll pick on primary key there. Good. Now let's see what else we can do with these fields. So let's go to that zip code. And for the zip code, now we're seeing the 9-digit zip code here in the United States. So I'm actually going to change the field size to 10. We'll have 9 for the number and 1 for the dash. So we can always go back and change our different data, the different properties for our fields. We can change the field's name. We can change the field's properties. Let's try another example. So I'm going to go to the phone number. So with the phone number, I would like it to have it formatted as a phone number. So we're going to try a new property over here that's called the input mask. The input mask will be how that field is going to be formatted when you type into that field. So now you could type in your own input mask, but there's some that are built right in. So follow my mouse over here to the right, and we're going to click on the 3 dots. The 3 dots is going to start something that's called the Input Mask Wizard. Now, when you use the Input Mask Wizard, it wants you to save the table. So I'll say yes to save the table. And then this is called the Input Mask Wizard. We got that by picking on the 3 dots to the right of Input Mask. Notice how there's one for the phone number, social security number, zip code, extension. Now, here's an interesting one. A password will just come up with those stars, so people wouldn't see the password. There's some for dates and times and so on. So let's use phone number. Now, what I would recommend is you tab down to your tried field and you see what that's going to look like. So I'm just going to type in a phone number. Notice how it comes in with the parentheses and the dashes. So the Input Mask Wizard has these built right in. I'm going to go ahead. That looks good to me. So now you can go further with the wizard, but I'll just pick on the word finish at this time. And now it fills in the Input Mask property over here. Now, if you want to really see what all those characters mean, so you can make up your own input mask, watch what I'll do. I'm going to be on the Input Mask property. Now, one way to get help in Access is the F1 function key. So on my keyboard, I'll hit F1, and it should give us the appropriate help. It's actually going to the Microsoft website, and it's talking about the Input Mask property, which is correct. Then I'll come over here and I'll pick on text box input mask. And then it'll show you what all these characters mean. So you can make up your own, and it'll even give you a bunch of examples. All right, so the help screens can be useful. I'm going to close that window. See how there's examples of the input masks, or if you use these characters, you can make up your own. I'm going to close that window for the help screen. Now we're back in Access. So the way I got there, I clicked on the Input Mask property, and I hit the F1 function key, and then it brought us to the appropriate help screen. So let's go back into Access again. Good. So anyway, what I did was I picked on the 3 dots to the right of that, and then we got to the Input Mask Wizard. So you might want to try those first, or you can make up your own. So that'll format the phone number. Let's do some more things here. Let's say for the start date, when we add a new record, I want the current date to pop up automatically. So watch what we'll do. We're going to go for the default value. That means, look what it says there over here, a value that is automatically entered in this field for new items. So the default value kicks in for new records. So this is the first time in the course that we're going to see something that's called the expression builder. So I'm going to click where it says default value for the start date field. I'm going to come over here to the right and click on the three dots. And that's going to open up a very powerful window that's called the expression builder. So we're going to see the expression builder a lot in these Access courses. It's where you can build a formula in Access, all right? So there's a lot that we can do with this window, and that'll be discussed quite a bit. So we do have some built-in functions like Excel does. So I'm going to pick on the plus sign to expand the functions. I'm going to pick on the built-in functions. And then you'll probably recognize some of those categories from Excel. So this one's going to be under the date and time category. And then if I want today's date or the current date, I'm going to double click on the word date right there. Double click, and that'll put that into the formula. So that's why it's called the expression builder. It helps you build your formulas or expressions. Now that formula can be very, very simple or very, very complicated. This is all we need for this one. And look what it says. Returns a variant of the data type date containing the current system date. So that'll be the current date. I'm going to click on OK. And then we see that formula is now in the default value property. It says equals date, open parentheses, close parentheses. That means every time we add a new record, the current date will automatically be in the start date field. So let's keep on going. We can add new fields here. So let's say after the email address, I want the company's website. Now I can add new fields down here at the bottom, but another way to add a new field is to right click on a field. So look, I'm going to right click where it says credit limit, or right click in this gray column where it says credit limit. And then I can insert rows or delete rows. So we're going to insert a row. And then I'll type in a website. And then if you can imagine, that will also be another hyperlink, right? I want that to be an active link. So we'll make that another hyperlink. So you can add fields at the bottom of the table, or I can right click on this gray column and insert a row and add fields in the middle as well. Remember, a table can have up to 255 fields per table. Very good. So you can see how in this screen, I can change a field's name. I can change a field's properties. We can add new fields. Now, if you wanted to, you can delete a field. So just as an example, I can right click on that field and pick on delete. And it would ask you, are you sure you want to delete that field? Now be careful when you're deleting the fields, because then you can't really get to that data that was in that field. So just be careful when you're deleting the fields. But you certainly could add new fields onto the table or delete the fields there. Now let's see if we can do a calculated field. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and use the discount amount. Now, before I made the discount amount a number field, but now I'm going to make it a calculated field. When I started with Access a long time ago, you couldn't have calculations in a table, but now you can. So I'm going to click on this pull down where it says discount amount, and then we're going to make it a calculated field. We could have started off with a calculated field right from the beginning. Okay, now notice how that brings us right into the expression builder. So let's just say if they are a preferred customer, then we'll give them 10%. Otherwise, we'll give them 0 as the discount amount. So this would be an example of a formula in Access. So I'm going to pick on this plus sign for the functions, and we'll go with the built-in functions. And you'll see it might have some that are familiar from Excel as well. Now here, the if function is actually IIF. So I'm going to double click where it says IIF. And it'll start to help you build that formula. So even though it's spelled IIF, it works similar to the Excel if function. So the expression in this case, now watch what I'm going to do. I want to go back to my fields for this table. So I'll pick on the clients table over here. Now I want to look at the preferred customer field. So I'll double click on that. And that puts that up there in the formula. So I'll say if the preferred customer equals true. Now, just like Excel, the word true and false are reserved words. So remember how we made the preferred customer a yes/no field. So I'm going to say if preferred customer equals true, then we have the true part and the false part. So I'll click where it says true part, and I'll type in 10%. And I'll click on the false part, and I'll type in 0. So it's kind of similar to what you might do in Excel, right? Here I have if, except it's spelled IIF, open parentheses, preferred customer equals true, comma 10%, comma 0, close parentheses. Notice how the word preferred customer is one of those field names, and anytime we have a field name in a formula, it'll put the field names in those brackets. Now we could have typed in the word preferred customer, but I don't really do that. I'll double click on the field down here when I can. It just makes it easier and it puts it into the proper format. But notice how the field name is contained in those brackets. That's going to be an important standard throughout all of our Access courses. So I'm going to click on OK. Now when you're on the expression builder, don't just close that window. If you close the window, you'll lose your formula. So click on OK there. Good. So it says you cannot set. So I'm going to click on OK. And then in this case, oh, you know what? I probably need a new field there. So this is one of those cases where I'm going to delete that field. And I'm going to say yes to delete that. And now I'll make a new field. So I'll call that one discount amount again. And I'll make it a calculated field right from the beginning. So we'll call that discount amount. Let me make it a calculated field right from the beginning. I'll pick on calculate it. Good. So we'll try that same formula. So I could just type it in. So I'll say IIF, open parentheses. I'll pick on the clients and I'll get the preferred customer again. And I'll say equals true, comma. I'll type in 10. I'll type in 0.1 there, in case it doesn't like the percent. I'll do 0.1, comma 0, close parentheses. So I have IIF, open parentheses. I double clicked on the word preferred customer, so it'll put that in those brackets, equals true, comma 0.1, comma 0, close parentheses. I'm going to click on OK. Now it liked that one. All right, so that's fine. So now what I want to do is I want to show that as a percent. So another property that you have down here is the format. The format will be how that field displays. If I click on the pull down for the format, then I see a lot of number formats and we see percent there. Good. So that's how we work with the calculated fields. Now we'll see a lot about the expression builder in this course and on the courses on queries and forms and tables as we go through the Access courses. All right, so notice how on this table we can change the field name, we can change all the properties, we can make a field into a primary key, we can add fields, we can delete fields, and we made a field a calculated field. Now let's say I want to move a field up or move a field down. So let's say that's start date. I want to kind of have it up towards the top. So I'm going to click on this gray area next to the word start date, and that's going to highlight the entire row. Then I'm still within that gray area. Now I'll just drag it up. You see, I'm just going to drag it up above the first name. Good. So that's how you can move your fields. You click on that gray box next to a field, then you can just drag it up or down. So you can also reorder the fields in your table as well. So we made the table using Design View, and then we can go back into Design View at any point and add or change fields as you need to. So I'm going to close that window now, and we're going to save that. Let's see if our changes took place. So I'm going to double click on that table. Good. So I'm going to add a new record. Now notice as soon as we add a new record, today's date is already in there. So that was the default value, right? So we'll type in MNO company. See how it has today's date, that was the default value, right? Now we can change it if we wanted to, but that's already in there. Now let's see what else we did. So I'll type in bill Jackson. Now, if I come over here to the zip code, remember how I changed it to a 9-digit zip code? So I'll type in 12345. I typed in 10 actually for the field size to accommodate for the dash, so now it fits that. For the phone number, remember how we did it, the input mask. So I'm just going to start to type in 2, and notice how it puts the parentheses there automatically. So that input mask kicked in. Notice now we have an email. And notice how that's coming up as a website, as a hyperlink. And then the website should also be a website. So I'll do mno.com. Good. You can just see that's going to be an active link as well. Credit limit worked before, the preferred customer. Oh, let's try the preferred customer. Look, see how we checked that one and it became 10%. This one is not checked, so the discount is 0. This one is not checked, so it's 0. If I click on this one, it makes it 10%. So notice how the calculated field works a lot like the calculations in Excel. When the values change, then the calculations will recalculate. And you can see the discount amount is kicking in like that. So now you have an idea of how to build your tables in Design View, how to actually do the data entry, and then how to change the tables in Design View as well. So I'm going to close that window. Next, I want to show you how to use something that's called the Lookup Wizard to help you build a pull down onto your fields. So if I double click on the client's table, and if we go to the state field, right now I have to type in the state. Wouldn't it be nice if we have a pull down for the state? Well, the way we're going to do that is with something that's called the Lookup Wizard. Now, what I recommend is to have a separate table with your lookup values. It'll just be easier to maintain. So let me take a minute to make a table out of the states. I'm going to pick on the Create menu up here, Create, and we'll just make another table using Table Design. Good. So I'll type in state, and that'll be the 2-character state. So for the short text, I'll change the field size to 2. Then I'll have the full name of the state. And there's that naming standard that many people will use. And then I'll make that one maybe like 50. Should be plenty of room for that. I'm not worried about making that one too big because, there's only 50 states here in the United States. So even if we made that too big, it wouldn't waste a whole lot of space. But 50 should be plenty of space for that. Now watch how we're going to make the state field into the primary key. So I'm going to right click where it says state, and we'll make that the primary key. That means it'll make sure there's no duplicates. So I'm going to go ahead and close that window. I do want to save that table, so I'll pick on yes. And I'm going to call this table states. If you're using that naming standard that I mentioned in a previous lesson, then it would be TBL states. But we could just use states here, and that'll be fine. And now we have the states table. So let's type in some states now. I'm going to double click on the states table, and now you're in Datasheet mode, or data entry mode. So I'll type in NJ for New Jersey. I'll just do a few of them. Do PA for Pennsylvania. DE for Delaware. NY for New York. So we have MD for Maryland. What happened there, if I try to type in more than 2 characters there, it's not going to let me because we made that 2 characters as the field size. So all that really kicks in. And then maybe we'll have a VA for Virginia and CT for Connecticut. And I'm going to change that Virginia. So you can always go back and change your record without a problem. Good. So of course I know there's more states, but this will just give us the states to choose from. So I'm going to close that window. And it saves automatically, by the way. If it doesn't ask you to save, it saves automatically. So the reason I made the states table is so now I can show you something that's called the Lookup Wizard. So watch how it's going to work. I want to use the states as the source for the state field in the client's table. So I'm going to right click on the client's table, and I'll pick on Design View. Now we're back into this screen. So look, we have the state field. I'm going to come over here and click on the data type for the state field, and we're going to click on the pull down, and we use the Lookup Wizard. And now it does start this wizard. So it says this wizard creates a lookup field which displays us the values you can choose from. How do you want your lookup field to get its values? I just made that table, so I want the lookup field to get its values from another table. That's the way I prefer it. It's just easier to work with. So I'll pick on Next. I want to use the states table. So I'll pick on States, and I'll pick on Next. Now this screen means when I click on that pull down for the state, which fields am I going to see? Well, I'd like to see both of those fields. So I'm just going to click on the double arrow. Well, you can pick them individually, but I'll pick on the double arrow to pick all of the fields. Good. I'll pick on Next. Now this means when I click on that pull down, how are they going to be sorted? And I'm sorted by, we might as well use the state abbreviation there. And you could have up to 4 sort fields there, but we don't need 1 for this one. We'll use the state abbreviation, and I'll pick on Next. Okay. Now this screen means when I click on that pull down, do I actually want to see the abbreviation? Yes, I do. So let's uncheck it where it says Hide Key Column. Now this is also where I can change the length of those fields, and that would work similar to the way it works in Excel. So I'm going to come over here and get the black cross and drag it back and forth like you would in Excel, and that'll be fine. And we could do the same thing over here. Good. So I'll pick on Next. Now this is a really important screen. This means when I pick one of those states from the pull down, which actual field is going to go back to the client's table. The state field is going to go back to the client's table. So I'll pick on Next. Now here's a really important screen. I'm going to pick on Enable Data Integrity. That means they can only pick one that's on the list. It's not going to allow them to pick one that, or type one that's not on the list. So I'd like that Enable Data Integrity choice. I'm going to go ahead and pick on Finish. And it says the table must be saved before relationships can be created. Do you want to save now? And we're going to say yes. So we'll see how those tables are related in a different lesson, but it actually makes a relationship between those two tables, so I picked on yes there. The way we got to that window was I clicked on that pull down for the data type, and then I did the Lookup Wizard. Now let's see what all that really means. I'm going to go back into the table Datasheet, so I'm going to right click on that tab, and I'll pick on Datasheet View. Good. So now let's click on the state field. Now the state field has a pull down, and that's what the Lookup Wizard just did. And you can see it's the different states in the states table. Now this is really interesting. The field isn't quite long enough for Pennsylvania, so we're going to go back and make an adjustment with that. But anyway, I can pick the states now, right? So what I recommend is that you make a separate table for your lookup values, and then we use the Lookup Wizard, and now they can easily pick a state. Now remember how we enabled that integrity. So if I type in California here, and I try to leave that record, it says, you know, it's not in the states table. So the integrity did kick in there. It's only going to allow me to pick the states that are already in the states table. Now, that's kind of interesting. What if I wanted to add California in? I would go back to the states table first. I'll double click on states. Then I'll add California in. All right, so we could always update the tables. I'm going to close that window. Now, if I click on the pull down, actually, what I'll do is I'll do a refresh all. So I really should have closed this other window, but I'll do a refresh all. Now I see California is there. All right, so I just updated the states table, and now the pull down is updated as well. Because otherwise, if I type in Ohio right now, Ohio is not on the list. And if I try to leave that record, it says I can't do that because it's not on the list. That was because of that data integrity that we put in there. So that is how we use the the Lookup Wizard. It's a great way to make a lookup column. You really should make a separate table out of your lookup values. It'll just be easier to maintain. And then we use the Lookup Wizard back in Design View. Now, so far, we've been able to make the table from scratch, but many times you might have existing data, and I'd like to show you how to start to import existing data into your Access database. So I want to show you a few. So far, we've been able to make the tables from scratch, but a lot of times you already have existing data, and you want to be able to import that existing data into your Access database. So let's see how we can do that. In this case, I'm going to pick on the External Data tab, and then we'll pick on New Data Source. And you'll start to see that Access is compatible with many different file types. So if I pick on From File, we can get something from Excel, HTML is a website, XML is a data source that might be on the internet. We have text files, which is also where we would get a CSV file. From database is Access or SQL Server or Microsoft Azure or even the old style DBase files. Online services includes SharePoint, Microsoft Dynamics, even Salesforce is there now, other data services. And then in this case, we have other data sources where we have ODBC data sources and even Outlook. So most of your data types that are out there will fall into one of those categories. So let's try a text file first. So I'll pick on From File and I'll say Text File. Then you would point to your text file on your computer. So the first thing I will do is point to my text file. So I'll pick on Browse. And then you would pick like a text file or a CSV. It has some different data types down here that you can use. So I'll pick on my desktop and I'll pick on the Class Files folder. And I have one that's called Leads, okay? And you can see when I move my mouse to the word Leads, it says it's a text document. It's a plain unformatted data file. So I'll pick on that one and I'll pick on Open. Now, we can either import it to a new table. That'll make a copy of that data and make a new table in Access. If you already have an existing table in Access, you can append it to the existing table. And then if you link it, that means it'll make a new table in Access. And then if we change the text file, it will change Access as well. We'll do some links in a little while. Let's do imports first. So I'll pick on Import and I'll click on OK. Now, a text file has to be handled in a special way. It's either going to be delimited or fixed width. Delimited means there's a character between each field. Maybe it's a comma or a semicolon. And then fixed width is where the fields are always in the same location. And this one is delimited. So I'll pick on Next. Now, you want to pick one of these delimiters. This one happens to be a tab. So as soon as I pick on Tab, we can see now we have nice even columns of data. If you ever see a CSV file, which is a really popular format, the C means comma. All right, so for a CSV file, you would pick on comma. If you're not sure which one it is, you can try the different ones. Clearly, this one is not semicolon. This one is not comma. The space is not bad, but tab clearly was the right choice. Now, if you notice the data, the first row does have my field names. So go ahead and check that. Usually that is the case. Not always, but usually it is. And then you can see what happened. These will be the field names in the Access database as well. So I'm going to pick on Next. Now, you could change the field names if you wanted to in the Access database. So as a matter of fact, since we're here, I'll get rid of those spaces. Other databases don't like spaces. So even though Access likes spaces in the data name, or it will allow them, I kind of be consistent with other databases. So I'll go through all the fields and see if there's any other that have spaces in the field names. I think that's the only one. Okay. Oh, business experience. So I'll click on that one and get rid of the space there as well. Good. Now, in this case, you can actually change the field name or the data type. You can make that field indexed in the Access database, or you can just skip that field and not import it. So you can do that field by field. I'll pick on Next. Now, here's talking about the primary key again. Microsoft Access recommends that you define a primary key for your new table. A primary key is used to uniquely identify each record in your table. It allows you to retrieve data more quickly. We can let Access add a primary key. That'll add one of those auto number fields. If you already have a unique field in that table, you would choose your own primary key, or we could say no primary key. In this case, I'm going to let Access add the primary key, and it'll put one of those auto number fields in there, as you can see. I'll pick on Next. And now that's it for the wizard. Now, this is asking for the table name as it's going to appear in Access. So I can use the same name, or I can give it a different name. I'm going to pick on Finish. Now, it says it finished importing that file into a table called Leads. Now, if you think you're going to import from that file again in the future, then you can save the import steps. And then to get back to the saved ones, you would pick on Saved Imports up here under the external data. So you would only have to use that if you think you're going to import from that same source again. And then the next time you do it, you could just use the import steps and it'll be a lot quicker. I'm going to pick on Close there. Now, it made a new table that's called Leads. Let's go into that table. I'm going to double click on that table, and notice how it has the same kind of data from the text file. So we were able to import that very easily. Now, one thing I'd like to change here, I'm going to right-click on that, or right-click on that tab and pick on Design View. Good. Usually I would give it a different name for the primary key, so let's call that one Lead ID. And then you can see how it's an auto number. And now, if we wanted to, we can get really consistent with those field names, right? So I could have done that in the other screen as well. But we'll just make sure those are all capitals, just to be consistent. So again, I'm using Design View to change the field names. In this case, I'll even have another capital there for this one as well. And then for this one. Okay, good. And then we can change the data types if we needed to as well. So that imported that data right from the text file. Let's close that window. And of course, we'll save the new design. Good. Let's import a file from Microsoft Excel. So I'll pick on External Data. I'll pick on New Data Source. And I'll say From File. And you're going to see that Excel and Access work very well together. So I'll pick on Excel. Then we're on this screen again. So before I do anything down here, I'll pick my Excel file first. So I'll pick on the word Browse. Now I'm going to use the address file. I'll pick on Address and I'll pick on Open. Now again, import is going to make a new table in Access. It'll be a copy of that data. Append means the table already exists in Access. Now let me say something about the append. If you use the append, the table has to already exist in Access, and it's only going to import the fields that are the same. So if you use append, you'll have a table in Access, and it's only going to actually use the fields that have the same field name in the Excel spreadsheet. So that's an important fact. And then we'll see what links are in a little while. So we'll pick on Import, and I'll click on OK. Now, in this case, you would know which data sheet your Excel file is in, or which data sheet your data is in on the Excel file. In this case, it's sheet 1. Or you can also use those named ranges in Excel as well. So I'll use sheet 1. If you look at the information here, you can see how those field names are on the first row again. That's going to be important for the next screen. So I'll pick on Next. And Microsoft Access can use your column headings as field names for your table. Does the first row contain your column headings? In this case, it does. So we'll use those field names again. I'll pick on Next. Now again, we can change those field names here. So I might as well do that here. like just to be consistent, right? So I'll make it capital F. We'll use capital L there. You can see what I'm doing. And then if they have spaces like this one does, we'll also get rid of the spaces. So you do a little bit of cleanup. No problem. Of course, I can always do this later on in design view as well, but I try to stay consistent with these field names. Address is already good. Now, I know what this table is, so I'm going to skip this field. See where it says proper address? I'm going to skip that field. So that means it's not going to be imported into Access. City is fine. For the state, I'll pick in the state. I'll just call it state without the province there. That'll be fine. Zip, I'll just change it to say zip code. Phone is fine. Area code. Now, I don't actually need these 4 other fields, so I'm going to click this one and not import it to Access. I'll pick on this one and not import it. I'll pick on this one and not import it, and pick on this one and not import it. So on this screen, I can change the field names of each field. I can make them an indexed field in the Access table. I can change the data type if we needed to, and we can choose not to import those fields. So you saw how I made some of those changes. We'll pick on Next. Once again, I'm going to let Access add the primary key, and that'll add one of those auto number fields in. I'll pick on Next. And now this time I want to give it a better table name, so I'll type in addresses. And that'll be the Access table name. And I'll pick on Finish. It was able to import that Excel file, called it addresses. I could save the import steps if I think I was going to use that again, so I'll pick on Close. Now we have a table called addresses. I'm going to double click that, and it looks pretty good. And notice how it only imported the fields that I asked for, and it skipped those other fields. And you can see what I'm going to do. I'm going to change that field name. I'm going to right click on the tab, and I'll pick on Design View, and I'll call the field name Address ID. See, if you left them with the name ID, it might get confused when you start to make relationships with other tables. So I like to give that a more specific name. Good. I guess I forgot to change that first name there and the last name. Good. So I'm going to close that window, and I'm going to save that table. So we imported from a text file, and then we imported from an Excel file. Let's import from a larger database. Now, to make this one work, you have to coordinate with your IT team. If you're not the IT team yourself, you have to ask for what we call an ODBC connection to that database. So your IT team will set that up for you. So this will be maybe SQL Server or Oracle, or some of the larger databases would require an ODBC connection. So your IT team will set that up for you. Watch how we'll import those. So I'll pick on External Data, New Data Source. This time I'll say from other sources, and I'll say ODBC database. ODBC means open database connection, which means that it can share data with other databases. SQL Server is a really famous one, Oracle, SAP, SAS. There's a ton of them, and they all work the same way. So I'm going to click that. We're going to import. Pretty soon I'll show you how to do the links. Pick on OK. Now this is where you would get the help of your IT team. I'll pick on Machine Data Source, and these are the ones I have on this computer. When you do it at work, you'll have a different list here. So I'll pick on SQL Server, which I have on this computer. Now sometimes it may ask you for your username and password, and you would ask for that for your IT team as well. So it's trying to connect to that. These are all the tables in that database. So your IT team will tell you which tables are necessary for your needs. So I'll pick on the products table, and I'll click on OK. And now it pulled the products table into our Access database, and then I'll pick on Close, and now we see a table that's called DBO Products. And that'll be an exact copy of the data from the larger database. This table looks pretty good. Yeah, no problem with that one as far as the field names, and it's already called Product ID. So I want to make sure that is the primary key of that table. I'll go back to design view. Now, right now, that is not the primary key. So if I wanted to make that field a primary key, I'm going to right click on that field and I'll pick on primary key there. That's going to make sure that they're all going to be unique. And then the other field names look fine and the data types. I'm going to close that window and we'll say yes to save that. So that was importing from a larger database. Now I'm also going to import from another Access database. We're going to go from Access to Access with this one. The reason that you would want to do that is maybe to make a copy of another database so I can maybe work with this as test data and not interrupt the production data. So let's see how we can import from an Access database. Once again, I'll pick on external data and I'll pick on new data source and I'll pick on from database. And here I can get Access, SQL Server, Microsoft Azure. We can even get those classic DBase files. So let's go with Access. You're going to point to your Access file. So I'll pick on Browse. Now these files that I'm importing, the text file, the Excel file, and the Access database, I've included with this course. So you should be able to use the same examples. So I'll pick on the tables database. I'll pick on Open. This time I'll do an import. And on the next lesson of this course, we'll show you what the link means. Click on OK. Now, because that's an Access database, I can actually import the tables, the queries, the forms, reports, the macros, and the modules, or any combination of those. So I'm going to get all the tables here. I can pick one table at a time, or I can say select all. All right, so it's going to import all of those tables from that database into this database. It's basically going to make a copy of those tables so then I can work with those as test data. So I'll pick on OK. And now we see when I pick on Close, now we have all of these tables in our database. Now I have copies of those tables, so I don't have to interrupt production. That's why you would do that. So when we get to the queries and forms and reports courses, then it's going to use those same tables. So we can import, when I pick on external data, I can import from text files, Excel, even XML and web pages. I can import from Access databases like we just did, SQL Server, Microsoft Azure, the DBase files. We can import from SharePoint, Microsoft Dynamics, even Salesforce. Other data services are out there. And then ODBC is one I showed you, and we could do Outlook as well. So that's how we import data from other sources into our Access database. Now, let's talk about what a link is. In that previous lesson, we imported all the tables. So even though I imported this from the Excel spreadsheet, this is an independent copy. So if I change this table in the Access database, the Excel spreadsheet does not change. They're going to be, they're independent copies because I did an import. On the other hand, if I link, then if I change the Excel spreadsheet, it'll update the Access database. So let's try a linked. So we're going to pick on external data. I'll pick on new data source. And I'll pick on from file again, and I'll pick on Excel. This time, I'm going to pick on browse. Now this time, I'm going to link to the address file, but we'll see the difference between an import and a link. Pick on address, and I'll pick on open. This time, I am going to pick on a link over here. All right, so we'll see what the link is. I'll click on OK. I'm still going to link to sheet 1, use that same data, and I'll pick on next. You can see how the first row does contain our headers. Usually it does. So I'll pick on first row contains the headers. Good. That'll be the field names. And I'll pick on next. Now that's the entire wizard. When we do a link, it's a little bit simpler. So I'll call this one linked addresses. And it says it's finished linking that table, so I'll click on OK. Now, notice how we have the address table and we have linked addresses. So I can rename that file, by the way. if I right click on that file and then pick on, the table and pick on rename, then I'll call that linked. Let's try it again. Rename. Then I'll click there and just get rid of the D and replace it with an S. You can right click on any of the objects and rename them and do different things from there, of course. Now, let's see the difference. If I go into the addresses table, that was one that we imported. So here, on the first record, I'm going to change it to, let's say I'm going to change that one to my name. So on the addresses table, I'm changing the first record to my name, right? We can see that. That one did not update Excel. Now, actually, the linked addresses table, I can view the data here, but I can't even change it. So if I try to type in something there, it doesn't let me. I can change it on the Excel side. So in this case, when it's linked to the Excel spreadsheet, I can't change it on the Access side. We really only have a view-only view on the Access side. I can change that on the Excel side. So now let's go back into Excel for a second. And I'm going to open up that same file. Okay, so I'm going to pick on Open here. And I'll pick on Browse. And I'm actually going to point to that same file on my computer, which is on the desktop. And it was the address file. Okay, so remember how we changed that one in Access. It did not change here. On the other hand, I'm going to change record 8 here to my name. I'm in Excel, right? I'm going to change that to my name in Excel. And I'm going to close that window now. So we're going to close that window and save it. Now let's see what happened in Access. This one did not change. You can see record 8 still has the same name as before. But if I go to the linked addresses table, then, well, in this case, they maybe are sorted by the last name. Actually, there it is. There's my name right there. All right, so when we have it linked to Excel, I can't change the data here in Access, but if I change it in the Excel spreadsheet, it will change it here in Access, whereas the other one did not change because that's an import. Let's try another link. This time I want to link to the SQL Server database. So once again, I'll pick on External Data, and I'll pick on New Data Source, and I'm going to say From Other Sources, and we'll do ODBC. This time we'll do a link, and I'll click on OK. In this case, I'll pick on Machine Data Source, and I'll pick on SQL Server. That's the ODBC connection that I have on this computer. That's where you'll have to have your IT team set those up. And I'll click on OK. I'm going to this time link to the products table, and then click on OK. Now, when we link, it wants to know what the unique identifier is, and the primary key in this case is the product ID. When we did an import, it did not need that, but when we do a link, it does. So I'll click on OK. Okay, now, notice how we have the DBO products table here. Now, this one we did an import. So if I change this one in Access, the SQL Server will not change. So you see where it says chair, I'll change that to say reclining chair. I'm just changing that in Access. That one will not change the SQL Server because that was an import. I'm going to close that window. Now, on the other hand, when we link to the Excel spreadsheet, I can only change it on the Excel side. With this one that's linked to the SQL Server, I can change it either on the Access side or the SQL Server side, and they will update each other. Here's how you can tell when the linked tables are. It's going to be the ones that have the arrows next to them. You can see this one is an Excel spreadsheet, and then this one is the ODBC connection. But the ones that are linked will have the arrow to the left. And if you move your mouse, you saw, it kind of shows you where the data source is. That's the Excel spreadsheet, and then that's the SQL Server database. So I'm going to double click on DBO Products 1. Now let's see. Let me go ahead and change some of these. So I'll change this tofu. I'll call that one garlic tofu. All right. So you can see how I changed it here in Access to garlic tofu, right? And I'm going to close this window and save that. Now let's go back to the actual SQL Server. So I'm going to go to the SQL Server for a second on my computer, which is this icon over here. And I'm going to pick on Connect here. And now I'm into that SQL Server. Now I'm going to go to the databases over here, and I think that one is in the PC Guide database, and I'll pick on the tables. And there's that products table. So if I right click on the products table here in the SQL Server, and if I say select top 1000 rows, remember how we changed that one to say the reclining chair, but here it still says chair. So that one did not change because that was an imported table. But then remember the other change that we made, if we came down here, see how that one says garlic tofu. So when it's a linked table, when we link it to the SQL Server, I can change it on the Access side and the SQL Server will update. We can even update the SQL Server side and the Access side will update. So watch, I'm going to close this window. Let's edit that table here in the SQL Server. So I'm going to right click on DBO products, and this time I'll say edit top 2000 rows or top 200. Okay, so let's see which one that we can change here. So let's see. How about, okay, so it says Uncle Bob's organic dried pears, right? So I'm going to change that. Maybe we don't have organic anymore. So I'm going to get rid of the word organic here on the SQL Server side. Notice how SQL Server has that same pencil. So that record hasn't saved yet until I leave that record. Good, so you can see it says Uncle Bob's dried pears. I'm going to close that window. Now let's go back into Access. Access is over here. If I go to the original DBO products table, that one I'm sure still says organic pears because that one was the import. And you can see it still says organic pears there. So when we did the import, it's just making an independent copy of that data. However, if I pick on the DBO products table, then see how that one does have the word organic missing there. So it's kind of interesting. If we link to an Excel spreadsheet in Access, I can change it on the Excel side and that'll update Access, but I can't change that one on the Access side. On the other hand, if you link to a SQL Server database or even to another Access database, I can change it on either side and the other side will update. So that's really the difference between a link and an import. The imports are just, they're just independent copies of that same data and they're not, neither one touches each other after that point, but the link does. If we link to an Excel spreadsheet, I can change it on the Excel side, it'll change it on the Access side. If I link to another Access database, or if I link to a SQL Server database or any of the other ODBC connections, if you change it on the SQL Server side, it'll change it here, or if I change it here, it'll change it on the other side as well. So that's the difference between an import and a link. Now, we can also export the data from Access into our other sources. So there's two ways we can export. So if I pick on the, let's pick on the orders table, I can pick on the external data tab, and then I can export it to Excel, a text file, XML. We can make it into a PDF. If you email it, it's going to make it into a PDF. We can export it to another Access database. We can start a mail merge with Word with that data. Or here, we can go to a Word file, SharePoint, ODBC, HTML, or even the DBase files. So you click on the table or the query, and then you can pick on external data, and then there's the export types, and you have more over here. Or I can also right-click on that file, on that table. If I right-click, I can export into the same data types. So let's export into an Excel file just to show you what that's like. I'll pick on Excel. Now, in this case, it's going to put it into, you can pick where it's going to go. It's going to put it in my desktop, which will be fine. And the Excel format is fine. And then I'll just usually click on OK on this window. And it says that file already exists. Do I want to replace that one? So I know I'll just replace that one in my case. Let's try that again. So I'm going to right click on that table and I'll pick on export and I'll make it Excel. So I'll just give it a different name. I'll call that one orders 2. And I'll pick on OK. That's better. And then it was able to do that. Let's take a look at that Excel file and see what it just made. So I'll go back to Excel really quickly. And then I'll pick on open. And I think that it put that into the desktop folder. And there it is. So I'll pick on orders 2 and I'll pick on open. And now notice how the field names are up top and then it shows all of the records. So we were able to export that directly from Access into Excel. So when you're in Access, you can pick on the table or the query and pick on the external data tab and export over here. And we see different data types. Or I can right click on that table or the query and then pick on export and then pick the data type from there as well. So you can see how Access is pretty compatible with many different data types. Let's talk about how you're going to manage the relationships in your Access database. So Access is a relational database, which means the tables can be joined together on a common field, and then we can use those tables in queries or forms or reports, as long as we can find a way to link them in on a common field. So when you set up the relationships at the database level, like I'm about to show you, then it'll carry through the entire database. So let's pick on the database tools, and then we pick on the word relationships right there. Good. Now, in one of the earlier lessons, we used the Lookup Wizard. And the Lookup Wizard joined the states table and the clients table. So if I scroll down on the clients table, we'll be able to see what field it's joining to. So it joined the state field over here to the state field on this table. So that actually happened during the Lookup Wizard. So that really makes sure that I can't put a state here that's not already in the states table. That's what that relationship does. So now we will use this window to add more relationships into our database. So come over here and pick where it says Show Table on the Design menu. And then you see a list of all the tables that are in that database. You can really choose as many as you wanted to. So I'm going to double click on Customers. I'll double click on Orders. How about Order Details, Employees, and Shippers. We'll just use those as an example, and I'll even go with the Products table. You could choose as many as you wanted to there. I'm going to pick on Close. You could always add more later on as well. So then we see the different tables. These are called field lists actually. Now when you look at the field list, the field that has that little key there is the key of that table. So watch what I'll do. I want to pick up the customer ID from the customers table and drag it to the customer ID of the orders table. I'm looking for that common field. Now, let's talk about that. They don't have to have the same field name. It's always nice when it does have the same field name, but it doesn't always work out that way in real life. But they have to have the same data type for it to work. Then we see this window. So we see the customer ID from the customers table and the customer ID from the orders table. If you enforce referential integrity, that means it won't let you have an order that has a customer ID that's not in the customers table. So usually I would do that. This way it won't let me have an order in the orders table that has a customer ID that's not in the customers table. That's what enforce referential integrity means. Cascade update related fields means if I change the customer ID on the customers table, it'll also change it on the orders table. So that's a good one to have. In fact, when you check on the first one, usually you check on all three. Then it says cascade delete related records. That means if I delete that customer ID from the customers table, it'll delete the corresponding records from the orders table. So usually, if I check on one of them, I check on all of them. Then the relationship type says one-to-many. The reason it made it a one-to-many is the following. It's because the customer ID happens to be the primary key of the customer's table, but the customer ID is not the primary key of the orders table. So one customer can have many orders because it's the primary key over here, but it's not the primary key over here. So it says one-to-many. If it was the primary key on both tables, then it would say one-to-one. One record can match to exactly one record on the other table if they were both primary keys. If neither one were primary keys, it would say indeterminate down here, or we used to call that many-to-many. But usually it'll be like one-to-one or one-to-many. Usually you do use a primary key. You don't have to, but typically we'll use a primary key as the linking field. And I'm going to pick on the word create there. Good. So then we can link our other field, our other tables. The reason we do it at this level is because then if I use the customers table and the orders table in queries or forms or reports, then that relationship will automatically be there. So that's why I do it at this level. Now watch, we'll pick up order ID from the orders table and drag it to the order ID on the order details table. And that one's going to be the same kind of thing. One order can have many details. So I'll pick on enforce, and we'll do all three of those. Typically, if you pick one of those, you pick all three, and I'll pick on create. Now, the orders table is going to go to the employees table by the employee ID. So I'll pick an employee ID from here and drag it to the employee ID over there. And again, one order can have, one employee can have many employee IDs. So notice that it's the primary key over here. So that's why I made it a one-to-many. And we'll click those boxes. Good. And then you can start to move the boxes around so they don't crisscross each other like that. I might even move this one so those lines don't crisscross. Now let's see. The orders table is going to go to the shippers table, but the field name is not going to be the same this time. So I'll pick on ship via from over here and then drag it to the shipper ID. Now it'll let me do that as long as the data type is the same. The field name does not have to be the same, but the data type does have to be the same. So I'm going to go ahead and check the three boxes. So one shipper can have multiple orders. So it's called shipper ID over here and ship via on the other side. So that'll work as long as they're the same data type. So I'll pick on create. And then the products table will be joined to the order details table on the product ID. So I'll pick up product ID from here and drag it to the product ID here. And then that'll be a one-to-many. One product can have many order details, and then we'll check those boxes. So it's saying it can't create the relationship and enforce referential integrity. So there must be an order in the order details table whose product is not in the products table. So it's not letting me do that. So that's fine. We won't do it for this particular one, but it's still going to be a one-to-many. Good. Now, if you wanted to change the relationships, you can go into the same window. You can pick on the database tools and then pick on relationships. And then we'll be back on this window. So you can move the boxes around if you wanted to so that the lines don't cross over. Now I can double click on that line, double click, and it brings us back to this screen. So you can, make your changes as you need to. Another thing that you have to know about is the join type. So let's see a good example. I'm going to double click on the line between the customers and the orders table. Double click. And then now we're on that relationship. Let's pick on join type. Okay. So the first one, the classic name for that is called an inner join. So it says only include rows where the join fields from both tables are equal. So that means it's only going to show the ones that have a match on both sides. That's called an inner join. This one is called a left adder join. So that'll show all of the customers, even if they don't have a match on the orders table. All right, so it could give you different results, and sometimes it does. This one's called an inner join. That'll only show the records that have a match on both sides of the customer ID. This one is called a left adder join. it'll show all of the customers, even if they don't have a match on the orders table. This one's called a right adder join. That'll show all the orders, even if they don't have a match on the customers table. So those could make a difference. So, in this case, we'll use the inner join. But, you could make a difference on those as well. So I'll click on OK. We got to that by picking on the join type of the relationship. And I'll click on OK there. So the way we got to this window was I picked on database tools and I picked on the word relationships. And then you can make the relationships here, or you can remove them or change them. When you're done with that window, you'll pick on close. And then of course you would want to save those. So I'll pick on yes, right? So we picked on database tools and then relationships. So I like to do it at this level so that now if I use the customers table and the orders table in the same query, which we'll do in the queries course, then it'll automatically have that relationship there. I like to do it on this window, so I'm going to do it once and then it'll carry through the rest of the database. Notice how not every table is going to be joined to all of the other tables. It just doesn't work out that way. Each table needs to be joined to one other table, but they're never going to be joined all to each other. It just doesn't happen. So as long as each table is joined to one other table, then you'll be fine. So I'm going to close that window. We'll see more about those relationships in the queries course and in the forms course and in the reports course. So that is how you manage your relationships in Microsoft Access. Let's do a little bit of auditing with our tables. So I'm going to pick on database tools, and then let's try one that's called database documenter. So this is a really good way to document your database. Now you can actually document your tables, queries, forms, and reports in the macros, but this time we'll just use the tables. Now if I say select all, let's see what it's going to give us. Now before I click on OK, I like to turn off some of the detail. So I'll pick on options. I like it where it says names, data types, and sizes, and names and fields here. These three are fine. This bottom one gives me too much information. I like the second one there, and I like the second one there. So it's just a personal choice. You can see which one is going to work for you. But that's the one I prefer. So I'll click on OK. That was called the options. Now let's click on OK and see what it's going to give us. Give it a second. Okay, so it made this nice report for you. Then you would print it out for documentation. Let's take a look. I'm going to zoom in. So then you have, for each table, you have your field names, and then it has the relationships. So we made a really nice report there. So all I did was, of course, I can print that from that point, or even export that to Excel. And now you have a great report that shows all the field names. Now let's go back a page. This one has the relationships between the tables and all that. So pretty quickly we made a very usable manual. So I'm going to close the print preview there. So the way I got to that was the database tools and then the database documenter. You should try that. And then I picked on options. I like the second one here and the second one here. It just gives you less detail than the full version at the bottom. Then I picked my tables and I picked on OK. Now another thing you might want to try with your databases is analyze performance. This will be really good when you start using the database. It might give you some clues as to what to do. So I'll pick on analyze performance. And I'll pick on all of the tables again. Now, when I do this one in real life, I would probably pick all of the objects, like all object types, and then select all. So then the purpose of this screen, it might tell you maybe if you wanted to add a primary key somewhere or if a table needs to be indexed. So let's see if it gives us any recommendations. I'll pick on OK. So it says table addresses change the data type of the field zip code from short text to long integer. So it's making that recommendation. I can either, if I want to do it, then I'll say select all, and then I can, in this case, it doesn't let me optimize. Sometimes the word optimize will do it for me, but in this case, it's just an idea there. as you can see. But the ones that come up as recommendations or suggestions, I can actually click those and it'll do it for me if I do optimize. Now this one doesn't really have, it just has the tables. As we add queries and forms and reports, you might get more information from that screen. And it gives you some ideas of what to do. And if you do those things, your database will probably be running at a better performance. So I'm going to close that window. The way I got to that one was under the database tools, and I picked on analyze performance. So those are a couple database tools for you. Now, at the end of each week, or maybe every couple weeks, I would compact and repair the database. So you'll see after you do that, that'll make things run a little bit quicker as well. So maybe I'll do that every week or every other week. You go into database tools and you pick on compact and repair. Now, when you do these items on the database tools window, you want to be the only one in the database at the time. So make sure that nobody else is in there. But when you do compact and repair, you might see the database will run a little bit quicker. And then this one might give you some ideas to make it quicker as well. This one is more of making documentation, like for a good manual. All right, so those are under the database tools. Those are some good utilities that come with Microsoft Access. Next, I want to show you how to sort and filter the table. So let's go ahead and double click on the customers table. Of course, when we double click on the table, it puts us into what we call data view or datasheet view. So now the normal sort and filter is built right in. So for example, if I click on notice how all the fields have pull downs on the top of the field. So if I click on the pull down for the contact name, then you would see a sort and filter very similar to the way it works in Microsoft Excel. Except here it's built right in. I didn't have to turn that on. So there's the normal sort, and then of course we can pick and choose them with the filter, as you can see. Now the filter is always temporary, so to get everything back again, by the way, you can tell down here it says 1 of 3. It tells you how many records are on that filtered, and then down here it does say that it's a filter view. Now one way to turn the filter off is just pick on the word filter right there, and then all the records come back again. So if you notice on the top of each column, you can sort and filter any of the columns. Now, if I pick on that filter and then pick on text filters, then you'll have other ways to filter that field as well. I could say equals, does not equal, begins with, does not begin with, contains, does not contain, ends with, or does not end with. So you have some different ways to do your filters. Now, another thing that you can do is you can come down here and pick on the word search, and I'll type in the word Peter, and notice how it brings me right to that record that has Peter inside. So you can do the normal sort and filter, you can search for the records down there, and so on. Now, as far as adding new records, a couple things I can do. I can pick on the home menu, and on the home menu, we have the sort and filter up here. We can pick on, we can add a new record. Now it always adds the new record at the bottom of the table. So even though I'm on record 11 right now, if I pick on the word new, then it always puts the new record on the bottom, right? So for example, I'll type in AAAA, and then over here, I'll type in American assets, and so on, right? So we can always add a record. It's always going to add a record at the bottom of the table. But of course, we can sort and filter on the fields. But when we do add with the word new right there, it adds it at the bottom. Now, another way to add a record is to click on this asterisk over here. That would also add a record as well. Then you can go back and forth with your records with the record navigator. So if I click on this arrow, you see how I'm back to the first record. This one would be previous. This is next. And then this will bring you to the last record again. So it's easy to navigate back and forth among the records. Now, if you want to go to a specific record by its number, over here I'll say, I'll just click there and I'll say 60. And when I hit the enter key, now I'm on the 60th record. So this is called the record navigator. So I can go to the first record, to the previous record. I can go to a specific record number. I can go to the next record or the last record, and this is adding a new record. Let's pick on the home menu. Of course, we have cut and paste and copy and paste. We can change the views. We have filter and sort. See, now these things make more sense now that we have data on the table. I can add a new record. You can delete a record. Now, if you delete a record, it'll ask you, are you sure you want to delete it first, okay? Here we could do find. We could do find and select, of course. We have our formatting. So these are all great ways to manage your table, and this can be done with any table. Now you see these plus signs over here. This actually relates to that relationship that we set up in the previous lesson. So remember how we had one customer with many orders, a one-to-many. So when we established that relationship with this table and the orders table, it added this plus sign over here. So if I pick on this plus sign, it'll show me all of the orders for that one customer. So that's where that's one place where the menu comes in, that I can get a quick snapshot. I can see all the orders for that customer by picking on that plus sign. So that was a direct result of the relationship that we set up in a previous lesson. So this view is called Datasheet View. With Datasheet View, I can add new records, I can change the records, we can sort and filter, and we can do a find. We can delete records. So that's how you can start to manage your tables. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close this window. Now, any changes that we make save automatically. If it asks you this question, it's asking if you want to change the changes to the design of the table. But if you make data changes, those should change automatically. So in this case, I'm going to say no. So none of the, I don't want to change any of the design changes, but the data changes save automatically. So that's going to be a good way to manage the individual tables.